بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين. I hope this way this table is ordered is okay for all concerned. I don't want to lecture, so it's more like an interchange or exchange. So if no one has any objections, please don't say anything. Okay. So inshallah we'll continue then with this. This is I think the sixth talk on the fifth talk, but with 6 stages, I think, if you include the pre-stages that are not technically part of the Manazil. So I think before we continue on the fifth stage of the usul, or the fundamentals, it's worthwhile summarizing where we are or where we came from, and whether the exercise so far has been of use to those of us, inshallah, who want to be on the path of wayfaring, and whether there have been some obstacles or issues that we may need to look at, so that this doesn't become just an academic, scholarly discourse. If you recall, when we first started, there was these 3 stages, the 10 pre-stages, doors that are part of the preparatory work, I think, of the modern wayfarer. And each of them has a certain quality to it, a certain aspect to it. And they're all intended as platforms from which we are able to ascend, as it were, to a higher degree of spiritual awareness and consciousness. And that is really the whole purpose of these talks. It's not really to explain the finer intricacies of the thought of great masters, although it's quite interesting in their own right, but rather as tools and guides for those who want to use them as part of the package, the toolbox that they have for progressing along this path. And if they haven't yet achieved that, whether it's repetition or revisiting them, would provide an advantage. I think it would provide an advantage, because otherwise we become disconnected. There will be this thicket of stations and doors and so on, and we may get lost in them. I think I will spend a few minutes just going back through, and I think you should try to situate yourself at one or other of the levels that we are at, or if you're at a different level, or if another hal or condition governs your reality, I think you should say so. I mean, to yourself and to those who are spiritually intimate with you. Most of those who sort of skirt along the path and feed from it when and if they feel the need, probably get sort of stuck in the pre-stages. Maybe one or two of them may in fact move on to a form of awakening, a form of alertness, and begin to experience the vitality and reality of these abwab, of these doors. The vast majority, though, of people who dabble on the way, and this is not really said either as in condemnation or as it's primarily a descriptive condition. Most people dabble because they are driven by this agitation and the need to make some sense of the various spiritual conditions that they find themselves in, and address this sense of anxiety or perplexity or hira that prevails on them. But these are ephemeral conditions. You can dwell in them without actually leaving them. You can spend your entire life in a state of perplexity and a state of inzi'aj or agitation. But this is not what this path is all about. It's about moving, advancing, ascending, and not constantly wallowing or dithering at the lower levels. Not that the lower levels themselves are not intrinsically worthwhile in their own terms. They are. But you all have the capacity to move up, to ascend. And you should not stop simply because you are comfortable in that state. The Quran, in fact, says so, that you are enjoined to exercise to the limit, to your limit. Most people think, well, there are the limits, I will do my best, but you have to do your best up to the limit. And if your limit includes your ability or your capability of moving on to the next stage, then you should do so. The whole point about this, and about any spiritual exercise actually, is to invert the sense of perception. You have to develop or recognize a different way of looking at things. And if you constantly refer them to what is comfortable, what is usual, then you have not really fulfilled your potential as a person who can act as the interface between the two realities of the seen and the unseen. Human beings, by their very nature, have this capacity of being barzakhi creatures of the interspace, creatures that are able to unite what appears to be irreconcilable worlds into their own reality. And this is what Marj al-Bahrain is all about. The Quran talks about the two oceans, the two oceans of the seen and the unseen, approaching each other, but with an isthmus between them, like the Panama Canal, as it were. So you are the Panama Canal between the Atlantic world and the Pacific world. And as an isthmus, as a barzakh, as an interspace, as a bridge, your potential is not only to see the realities of both, but to act as the vehicle or the vessel for yourself to cross that or to traverse that bridge. So these, as I said, it's worthwhile, inshallah, now or later, for you to go back to each of these. And maybe the jumble in which they come in this is not cast in stone. I mean, you start with the door of awakening and you end up with this. These are basically very malleable ideas, very malleable conditions, and you have to stretch them and bend them and mold them to fit your own reality. But by and large, they serve as guideposts, they serve as indicators, they serve as signs. And the world of the unseen is really a world of signs. It's a world of symbols. It's a world of example, mithal, as the Quran says. And without the capacity to understand symbols and isharas, signals, and mithals, you would not have the language, the necessary language, to converse with this other reality. So all of that really, I believe, is designed to awaken in a person the rise, as it were, of a language of spiritual consciousness. Now, there's a language of spiritual awareness, which is to do with the outer realities, and this is the language of the rituals. but they are not necessarily the same. The inner reality has its own form of rules, has its own rules and its own guides. And since we cannot experience them substantially in a substantive sense, we can only experience them by inference, by example, by symbols, and sometimes even by myths in the good sense of the word, the mythos, not in the sense of something that is whimsical, but something that has a reality because it's an archetypal reality. So all of these stations are archetypes. They are ideals. They are stations that, stripped of their denseness, become the luminous doorways, as it were. So when you see words that appear to make sense to you in the mundane world, they do not necessarily have the same significance or meaning when you relate them to a spiritual reality. So this is really a very, very important lesson, as it were, that one should have gained through this experience. And while reviewing them, reflecting on them, thinking about them, it is essential that you see them in the context of this inner language that you need to evolve. I mean, this inner language has been talked about by many of the masters before, and once again, it is not really worthwhile simply to regurgitate what they said. What they said was for a different time, a different age. There's a certain universality to it, but that universality has to be conditioned by our own circumstance, and our own circumstance has to remold these words, remold these terms, so that they become as real to us as they were to our predecessors in an outer universe that has lost its outer world, that has lost its capacity to engage with the unseen or with the sacred. So with that in mind, I mean, we can go to the fifth of the stages of the Manazil, the fifth Manzil, which is the stage of the fundamentals, al-usul. Looking at this stage, you might think we sort of move backwards, as it were, because they all seem to be dealing with sets of virtues that, in some ways or other, have been discussed in a different context before. The fine definitions here are not. This is not a science. It's a science in the sense that it is an access to realities that are natural, but it's not a science in the sense of an empirical science, which you can observe and measure and so on. It follows different kinds of programs, and looking at it with the eye of inversion, by placing not yourself at the center of understanding, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the center of understanding, you will then see these words and these concepts assume a different kind of reality. Let's take the first one, qasd, which I've translated as purposefulness. It can also mean the end. It can also mean the objective or the target. Generally, the stage of fundamentals, Ansari says, is the fundamentals are the structures for appropriate conduct and the bases for progressing along the path. They are the halting points for the heart from which the intellect proceeds. What he means here is that the heart is the vessel for, at least in classical tasawwuf, and also in modern parlance. It's the vessel which can comprehend the unseen. It's a vessel that relates to the subtler realities. The intellect, which we have mistranslated as mind, the intellect has that purpose too in the outer form. But the intellect in the inner world is a different kind of faculty. It is not the calculating mind of logic or reason. It is not the faculty that weighs and measures. It's not the faculty that is the central point of understanding cause and effect. The intellect in the inner world is the faculty that sees, that points to the limitations of that. It's in fact the opposite of that. So reason, or al-aql, in the inner reality is not something that is ever expanding. It is in fact a faculty that includes human reasoning, but also understands the limitations of the empirical base of knowledge, of human knowledge. And therefore it's a kind of metaphysical entity which relates to the unseen. So it is that faculty that has a will, that has a direction. And the direction of that is to understand the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not to understand causality. So always invert when you're dealing with the inner realities. So the purposefulness, the focus of the intellect in a human being is to understand the pathways and the mechanism that can relate, combines all the inner faculties towards that objective. So at this stage, in stage 5 as it were, Ansari builds his case, builds the doors around that ability, that specific function of the aql, of the intellect. And I have said here as commentary on that is that this entire stage where the intellect of a person comes to the fore, acting on the earlier stages where the self was the focus of the Wayfarer's endeavors. Before, if you recall, it is to do with improving the qualities of the self, the virtues, the fadail of the self. Now we've come to the point where the assumption is that your qualities have emerged. I won't say been effective, but have emerged. And you can see how they relate to heightened spiritual consciousness. You can see, for example, how any of the stages beforehand that we discussed have in their own ways. The perfection of these specific virtues are in their own ways an indicator to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here, the ball, as it were, is passed on from the virtues to the intellect, but not the intellect of reason. It's a combining element. It combines reason and the heart. So here I said, by intellect is meant the reasoning faculty that can discern the luminous and subtle. It is not so much the mind. It is not the mind of psychiatrists. It's not the ego, super ego, and all that of psychoanalysis. It is not the psyche of a human being. It is much, much more than that. Well, mind is part of the intellect, but mind by itself cannot discern the luminous. And the heart, as it were, the driving motor of the intellect in the spiritual realm is will and desire. These two elements. A lot of this, by the way, has been appropriated into Western or modern philosophy. I mean, will and desire is the heart of, for example, Schopenhauer's philosophy. But it's a different kind of will. It's the will to action at the mundane level. It is not the will that seeks realization in Tawheed, in the One. So the focus is different. The purpose is different. But I mean, Ansari talks about will and desire in the same vein as these 19th century idealists talk. But the goal is different. The goal is not to create a Superman, as it were, a Nietzschean Superman. The goal is to create the complete self that understands the origin and can point You can see the one behind the multiplicities. So, as I said, it is the bedrock of action which is based on will and desire. This is the stage where the intellect is refined towards the higher goal of purposeful action, where the intellect is aware of its powers, but is also aware of their limitations. The first door is the door of qasd, purposefulness. The ayah in the Quran that he starts with is, whosoever leaves his home as an immigrant to God and his messenger and is overtaken by death, his reward falls upon God, for God is all forgiving, all merciful. So this is the qasd, this is the target, this is the end result, fortified by a Quranic ayah. And we are immigrants, as it were. We are muhajirs in this path. The wayfarer is a traveler, is an immigrant from one condition, from one realm, from one familiar abode to another zone that is unknown or different. Think of yourself as a 19th century immigrant leaving, I don't know, the wilds of Russia and emigrating to the States. But this is an inner journey. It's a different kind of journey. It's the same kind of fears and the same kind of anxieties and expectations overwhelm the wayfarer in the inner world. But as you have your eye focused on the outer world and wherever you're going, whichever country you're emigrating to, here your eye is focused on proximity to the station of oneness. He says, Ansari says, purposefulness is a determination to abjure all but obedience. So again, it's a kind of inverting the idea. If you're utterly obedient, you basically give up your will. So how is that related to having a goal? But that is the meaning of the highest station, for example, of any realized being is the station of servitude, where absolute freedom originates from. So here, to be purposeful is in fact to abandon all other objectives except the one that is pointed out to you. So it is a form of absolute obedience too, although in the outer world, purposefulness might be the opposite of obedience. It can't be purposeful and obedient at the same time. Somebody else's will prevails over yours, or your will prevails over theirs. And he defines these stages or conditions in the usual three definitions for the common, what it means for the common man or woman, for the elect, and for the elect of the elect. So at the lowest level, it is the one that focuses on maintaining one's commitment to the spiritual exercises and overcoming all obstacles and banishing hesitancy. At the second level, at the level of the elect, as it were, it's where you do not allow any negative, any obstructive, any impediments to arise in your quest. You brush them aside, you ignore them, you deflect them. And the last stage, the highest stage, is purposefulness of surrender to the rules of outer knowledge, responding to the demands of Allah's commands, and determination to dissolve in the ocean of oblivion, which is one of the states that are called fana, which is obliteration. My commentary on that in more sort of contemporary language is that the objective of purposefulness is to ensure that the wayfarer does not waver from his or her objective, and that the intellect as well as the self are now trained to be single-minded, moving towards their goal. No obstacle, be it social, religious, political, cultural, or intellectual, is allowed to block or force a deviation in the path of the wayfarer. Observance of outer rules becomes immediate rather than something that you debate, pro and con. While you keep always your target in mind, and when you see glimpses of it, then you know that it is within your grasp. And to be purposeful, to be focused on the objective, you also have to be you have to have resolve or azm, which is the second law. And when resolved on a matter, put your trust in God. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. This is a very well-known ayah, and it's usually said in conjunction with people who are embarking on some expedition, or on some dangerous task, or on some action that they are hesitant about. Do always say, فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Of course, in the where we are going, it means has another twist to it. Resolution is to realize a purpose, whether voluntarily or by compunction. It's a very, very unusual explanation or explication of what resolution means. Is to realize the purpose, whether voluntarily or by compunction. العزم هو تحقيق القصد طوعا أو كرها. It is of 3 degrees. Firstly, by not allowing the state of the wayfarer, now experiencing, hopefully, inshallah, flashes of unveiling and intimacy, and intimations of oblivion, of fana, to cause the wayfarer to retreat. What he means here is that sometimes the shock of recognition is so great that really, you step back. You become afraid. You become unsure. You think it might be some kind of delusional state, or it is such an overwhelming flash that you are not sure whether you want to experience it again. It's very hard to explain for those who have seen these flashes. It's easy for them to understand. The sense of fear overwhelms rather than awe. The initial response. Of course, you want to turn away and run. It's like walking and suddenly an elephant emerges in Oxford Street. It shocks you. You don't want to look at it. You want to run away from it. So it is. Resolution is to do with that. It's to do with whenever you are grace, I suppose is the word. Maybe it's not the right word. Wherever these intimations occur, they are not to be ignored. You cannot retreat from them. So, if you want to stay on this wayfaring path, you can retreat from them if you want to. But you cannot claim that you are reaching your qasd, your purpose. My commentary on that is that the stage of resolve or resolution is a bridge between righteousness and goodly action and the station of proximity. It's not enough to stay at the lower rungs. We have started something, you want to finish the job. You don't want to give it up at any point. At this point, the wayfarer experiences a fundamental shift in perceptions and experiencing. Verities fall by the wayside, and a new world of luminosities and subtleties beckon. The temptation is always to fall back. After all, the state from which one had emerged is in itself a noteworthy state. I mean, you're not emerging from ignorance and darkness. You're coming from stage 4 here, looking at it mechanically. And it's a stage of akhlaq, and you're supposed to have gone through patience, gratitude, chivalry, and then expansiveness and judgment. So, it is not that when you say I'm retreating, you're not retreating to a kind of darkness, you're retreating to a lower degree of light. But your resolve pushes you forward. Ahead lies a condition about one which has had no previous knowledge and experience. The self seeks preservation. Every human being seeks to preserve yourself. It's natural. And that degree of preservation becomes more acute if the future has in it the idea of oblivion or of obliteration. So why would you resolve to an end that has in it the possibilities of oblivion? So your resolve here is really tested to the limit. And if you have reached or are or beyond this stage, you must really plow ahead. You have to. And to plow ahead, you need not only resolve, you need also will. As I said, it is all this stage is to do with will and desire. Irada is will. And say each person acts according to what befits the person. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال الله تعالى قل كل يعمل على شاكلته. This is again a very, very powerful ayah that is used in the outer sense to explain how each person or group or community thinks that it is doing its best by acting according to its own rules. And this is the nature of each person acts. There's an element of not condemnation, but it is not too commendable in the outer world for each one to act in their own, what they think is in their own interest, because what they think is in their own interest is not necessarily the interest of others or the community as a whole. But in the inner world, there is the community is within you, the kingdom is within you, and the elements within you have to be in harmony. And Ansari, again, this point of inversion comes time and time again. Will is to respond voluntarily to the demands of the truth. It is the opposite of our truth. Here, whatever Allah's presence or reality impinges on you or falls upon you, that is your will. It is not to resist, it's in fact to yield completely as a matter of voluntary action to the demands of the haqq, the truth. It is of three degrees. One, for the common people, leaving habits behind while fortified by the Sharia. I'll come to the Sharia later on because it's an issue here. Holding fast onto the path of wayfaring with truthfulness in one's purpose, and staying away from those who distract and disturb from one's path and condition. For the elect is breaking away while keeping true to one's faith, freshened by the breath of intimacy and moving between expansiveness and contraction. And the highest condition is astonishment while maintaining uprightness and ensuring courteous conduct. My commentary on that is that will in the wayfarer is a response to the irresistible pull of reality. It is not something that you exert. It's something that is exerted upon you. So, while will in the outer world is a person in action, moving things forward, ahead, forcefully, will in the inner world is the opposite of that. It is to successively and progressively yield to a greater will. In the inner reality, what passes for human will is actually the loss of will to the all-willful. This is the heart of the Hadith Qudsi, whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that for every step towards Him by human beings, Allah will take 10 steps towards Him. So the ratio is 1 to 10. In reality, the ratio is not specifically that, but it means that every time you yield, the degree of success is geometrically enhanced. The surrender to the will of Allah, expressed as human will, is a geometric relationship and is compounded as one draws to the station of proximity. As you get higher and higher, your will, your outer will, becomes apparently incredible, but your inner will, which is expressed in an inner will that loses its outer irada, but is much more, becomes merged into this sort of magnetic field, as it were. And this effort as you climb the hill is rewarded by the effortlessness in descending. But of course, you're very careful when you go down, because you can very easily stumble and break your neck. So it's the metaphor of climbing a mountain, reaching the top. You don't really climb down mountains. You really have to be very careful how you climb down. Sometimes it's more dangerous coming down than going up. The fourth door is the door of courtesy or adab. We've come across that before in earlier contexts. But here, the ayah, the Quranic ayah is and the respecters of the bounds of God. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال الله تعالى والحافظون لحدود الله. Those who respect the boundaries are the limits, the conditions, and the courtesy. Courtesy is understanding, acknowledging, and respecting the boundaries. Ansari says courtesy is preserving the line between excess and bareness, while knowing the dangers of slipping into either. It is of 3 degrees. Courtesy is stopping fear from moving into despair, hope from moving into false security, and controlling joy from turning into disappointment. At the second level, courtesy is moving from fear into the field of contraction, and climbing from hope into the field of expansiveness, and from joy towards the field of witnessing. And the highest condition is courtesy is knowing its essence and then abandoning it by relying on grooming by the truth, and then altogether being free of witnessing the burdens of courtesy. So you abandon courtesy as the final element, because the whole act of being courteous creates a sense of false power on your part to be courteous. So the power to be courteous, the relationships of courtesy to the person or to the object of courtesy becomes at the highest level incidental, because you do not have the power. You acknowledge that the power of you, it's like being thankful or being in gratitude. Being in gratitude implies that you have the power to be grateful, but you actually don't have the power to be grateful. Gratitude is one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have borrowed that. So at the highest level, you recognize your relationship as being that of a borrower, and therefore you return it to its owner, to its possessor. I say courtesy is knowing the duties that are incumbent on one without addition or subtraction. On the path of wayfaring, it is often that one encounters states and conditions that are entirely new and can lead to inappropriate responses unless the balance is kept. There's an element of equilibrium, there's an element of scaling, as it were, in the idea of courtesy. And when you come across new states and conditions, the temptation once again is to be absorbed into them, and therefore they may have their own dynamic. They may create their own demands on you, which may lead to inappropriate action. So you have to know the boundaries. You have to be limited, as it were, by what is courteously acceptable in the condition in which you are in. A state of utter helplessness, for example, can lead to despair. And if you feel absolutely helpless in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the potential outcomes is to be despair. You despair of your condition. What am I good for? If everything emanates from the one, what role do I have, and what potential do I have in realizing my own spiritual reality. So a sense of being in complete impoverishment to Allah must be counterbalanced by another condition if we don't fall into despair. Or glimpses of realities can lead to joy and then to unexpected shock. This can happen very, very frequently. Is that you may want to recreate, as it were, a high which doesn't materialize for whatever reason. And then you fall into well, have I been abandoned? And the Prophet ﷺ said that was in that condition when the Surah Al-Duha descended. It is to do with why has this message not reached me anymore? Have I been abandoned? But it is a necessary station to be in. Courtesy is necessary so that the wayfarer does not transgress and begins to attribute to himself or herself attributes and qualities that are those of the truth. And the truth is yaqeen, another name for absolute proximity. Is knowledge of absolute proximity is yaqeen. We know, of course, of the three stages of yaqeen in the Quran: the ilm al-yaqeen, the knowledge of certainty; the ayn al-yaqeen, the eye of certainty; the haqq al-yaqeen, the truth of certainty. And each one, I may have used the simile before about the fire, which describes the degrees of certainty. Knowledge of the fire is not the same as seeing the fire. And seeing a fire is not the same as being inside the fire. He starts with the ayah, and on earth are signs for people of certain faith. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تعالى وفي الأرض آيات للموقنين. Ansari says certainty is a vessel for those who are on this path. It is the last stage of the common folk, but the first step of the elect. I think what he means is that ilm al-yaqeen and ayn al-yaqeen, that is the knowledge of certainty and witnessing certainty, is what most people aspire to, is what most people find comfort and confidence in, and want to anchor themselves. But for those who are starting on a much more intense, as it were, experience with the spiritual realities, this is not the end point. This is the starting. The knowledge of certainty, or ayn al-yaqeen, ilm al-yaqeen, he says, is to accept what truth has revealed of itself and what truth has sought to conceal of itself, and to be satisfied with what is established by truth. The eye of certainty, or ayn al-yaqeen, is to be strengthened by intuiting and not by rational proof, and by insight and not by information. Haqq al-yaqeen, or the truth of certainty, is to know beyond mental or sensory experience, and then to abandon certainty that comes from oneself, returning all to Allah, and then to be obliterated in the truth of certainty. My commentary on that is to use the simile of the fire. Knowledge of the fire is to be told of the properties of fire, its heat, its color. The eye of the fire is to actually be hurled into the fire, experiencing its rage and its furnace. The truth of the fire is to be in the fire, to be its fuel and its flames. The wayfarer in the first degree knows of the existence of the truth. In the second degree is to know the attributes of truth. In the third degree is to efface one's personal existence in the all-encompassing truth. Yaqeen also can also mean physical end or death. وَعَبِدَ اللَّهَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيكَ الْيَقِينَ has that implication. and worship Allah until you achieve certainty. Some of the interpreters say that this means death. It means the end of the physical realm, where a different kind of certainty comes into being. It's no longer the certainty that is confirmed by sight, sound, touch, taste, etc. And then the station follows the station of intimacy, uns. How do you experience uns? If my worshippers ask you about me, I am near. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تعالى وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب. I think from Surah Qaf this is. But intimacy, Ansari says, is the soul of the heart. The heart being the vessel of perception of the subtle realities. The heart of it, the heart of the heart, which is known as al-fu'ad, as the Quran says, is the heart, the kernel of the heart. The kernel of the kernel is called the lub. So there are 3 degrees to the experience of the spiritual realities. The heart in its outer form is form that can engage with the unseen. Has in it an inner heart which does not deviate. It is always oriented towards the truth. And there are many ayahs in the Quran that talk about the heart that has emptied. For example, when Prophet Musa's mother was asked to cast her infant son into the river, she was asked to do that after her heart had emptied. إذا فرغ فؤاد أم موسى. So it is the emptying of a heart, even though it's a vehicle of perception, leads to the core, the spiritual core. But the core of the core is called the lub. And al-bab in the Quran deals with those who have reached the highest state of spiritual realization. Ulil al-bab, the Quran talks about these people. That is those who are governed by the kernel of the core of the heart. Uns also is another word, the root word for insan, which means a human being in Arabic. And one of the definitions of a human being, if you use the linguistic root of uns, is that entity that seeks intimacy, al-insan. Insan also can mean the entity that forgets, from nisyan, but it is more often related to uns as an creature that seeks outer intimacy. Also a creature that necessarily seeks inner intimacy. And inner intimacy not between only the self and soul, but between the self, soul, and the origin of both. And the more intimate you become, the self becomes more and more intimate with the soul, which is as it were, the ambassador or the messenger of the unseen in the person. The more it becomes gradually absorbed into it and takes its coloring. It comes first as flashes and brief rapture, and then becomes established as absorption to the one. The state of intimacy gives total confidence, security and power to the wayfarer. But with it comes also risks. Confusion as to who is subject and object can lead to heedlessness and immanence. It can lead to you taking on the colorings, but then confusing the colorings with the essence. And courtesy, of course, then comes into play, the state that you were in before. That's why it precedes this. So you put these states into their appropriate ordering, keeping the outer bounds clear while dissolving them in the inner reality that all returns to Allah. The next stage or next manzil. He calls it the stage of dhikr or memory. Now he talks about dhikr elsewhere, but again it's one of those Arabic words that has in it can have different flexions, as it were. In an earlier context, he calls it dhikr, but he means something else. Yes, he calls it the door of remembrance, tadakkur. Dhikr and tadakkur are two, it's a word play. Dhikr is actual memory. Tadakkur is memorizing. So there is a subtle difference, but they are at a higher, different stage, and I'll try to explain. When you're at the very earliest stage, your intonations, your remembrance, as it were, is an act of volition. It's an act that is generated by your desire, as it were, to remember. Your striving to remember. This is tadakkur. The striving to remember is tadakkur. This stage is the one of dhikr, when you are in dhikr, when you are within the notion of remembrance, rather than going through the process of remembering. There's no exertion involved yet. You are in that state. He defines remembrance, or dhikr rather than tadakkur, is to be free from the heedlessness of forgetting. It's again another condition which is seen more by subtraction than by addition. It's the la ilaha part of it. La ilaha illallah. That's why you start with a negative first. The state in which you're in is forgetting. The less you forget, the more you remember. So it's like an equation. It's not that the less that you forget of your heedlessness, automatically the other side increases. So heedlessness is in fact non-existent, like in the inner realities. Like darkness is non-existent in the inner realities. In the inner realities there's only light. The less light, you have a condition where there is no light, which is darkness. Darkness has no reality in itself. Heedlessness in human beings has no existential reality. The reality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The reality is you remembering. If you forget, it doesn't give any substance to your forgetfulness. It is a state of negation rather than a state of a positive attribute. That's why the Shahada starts with La ilaha. It starts by negation, because there's only Allah. And the less that you attribute anything else in existence, the more your knowledge becomes secure, and the more you become proximate. The lowest form of remembrance of I call it remembrance. Actually, it's memory. The concept of memory. Outer remembrance is to glorify and to supplicate. Hidden remembrance is to be absorbed in witnessing and determined to persevere. True remembrance is to witness the remembrance of truth within you. To be liberated from seeing your own remembrance and knowing the conditionality of the one remembering while confirming his permanence in the remembered. So the act of remembering itself, the condition of being in memory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is really in the final stages also chimerical. You cannot have a memory of something if that something is total. It embraces existence in its entirety. That is, of course, the highest level of and trying to contemporize it to make it more accessible. I've tried to write in a different way. The soul cannot forget its creator, but the self can displace its remembrance. And the illumined self can forget what is other than truth, and thereby confirm its remembrance. This type of forgetfulness is commendable for the wayfarer, as it always puts the truth before all else. The more the truth emerges, the less can other than truth have any consequence or significance. The stages of dhikr are steps towards reaching the unveiling of seeing only the truth within oneself. The realized self cannot accommodate two realities. There's only one reality, and infinite conditional realities. One can acknowledge their conditionality and then use them as pointers to the one reality, but never give them their own independent reality. This sense of being impoverished, human beings actually, the realized self knows that it owns nothing, and it is in a state of absolute faqr, impoverishment, which is next door. O mankind, it is you who stand impoverished to Allah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال الله تعالى يا أيها الناس أنتم الفقراء إلى الله. You are the ones who are impoverished. Poverty is the denial of ownership. It is not to own anything. It is to deny the notion of ownership, which is a false notion in the spiritual realm. If you can't own something, or if the idea, the notion of ownership does not arise, it's like living in a country where everything is leasehold. There's no freehold, so it doesn't occur to you that you can actually own something. Some other landlord owns it. This is poverty, irrespective of the lease terms. Lease terms can be 1 billion years, but still, you're poor. Year 999 million, whatever it is, when the last second comes, you still don't own anything. Recognize that not by the tongue, of course. It's easy. It's always just repeat these words. But recognize that as an existential reality, as a truth, is very, very important. For wayfarers, not for other people. Poverty of the ascetics. So 3 degrees. With zuhad, I think ascetics is the right word, is to abandon the world by not desiring it, or wanting to remain in it. Keeping the tongue quiet by neither praising nor blaming the world, and seeking safety by staying away from it. This is type of poverty of which much had been spoken of in Sunnah. When you talk about the poverty of the ascetics, it's to do with that. It's to do with people not owning anything, not wanting anything, neither caring much about the world. Imam Ali says, this is the poverty of the zuhad. It is not to own anything, but rather not to have anything own you. To see the signs of eternity in all the favors that one has received. This leads you to not seeing your hand behind your works, and stops you from attributing to yourself your high condition and states. And lastly, to see only the perfection in what has transpired, yielding to the hand of the One, and reveling and remaining within the circle of proximity. This is the poverty of the Sufis, he calls it. My take on that is that the essence of the poverty of the Sufis is not to attribute any signs of ownership, and acknowledging that the owner and the inheritor are one. Allah is the warith. The rights of ownership are not ours, and the condition of possessing anything or anyone simply does not arise. The elaborate rituals that we use to establish ownership are in reality struggles over illusory rights. They have only a conditional reality, and an inferior and substantial one at that. In the realm of dealings and transactions, other rules apply, of course, in the outcome. But the quality of one's dealings is immeasurably enhanced, ethically and in terms of personal enlightenment, if it is qualified by this knowledge. Allah is the owner, and He is the inheritor. Those on the highest rung of illumination simply dwell in a realm where the notion of possessing and owning is simply accepted as being the sole property of the one. Personal existence itself is a gift of the owner. So where does the right of ownership originate from? So Allah is the one who is the all-wealthy, Ghani. Bismillah. Can we wait until the end? Okay. And you were dependent, and then He enriched you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال الله تعالى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى. Ansari says wealth is the name given to the absolute owner. It's another name of Allah, Al-Ghani. There are many people who call Abdul Ghani. Al-Ghani is the all-wealthy. The wealth of the heart is the lowest degree of realization of Allah as the Ghani. It is the unchaining from seeing only causality. That you don't see everything in terms of cause and effect. Acceptance of His commands and His freedom from seeing other than Him. That's a wealth of the heart. The wealth of the self is to stand upright in front of what it truly desires and being spared from its own vanities. Here we end up, the second one is to do with one of the inner faculties that human beings have lost. It is the faculty of wahm. Wahm, if you ask an Arab these days, you ask Ustad Mahmoud, he'll tell you that it is an illusion or a delusion. The person has wahm. In reality, wahm is the faculty that gives value to things. What gives true value to things. So the wealthy self is a self that has true wahm, true ability to ascribe value to what is really important to that self. And lastly, wealth by the grace of the truth. This has three aspects. His remembrance of you, your enthrallment by His oneness, and your victory by His being. Wealth of the wayfarer is in simple terms his or her recognition and acknowledgement that the owner, fashioner and inheritor is one. The state of fullness and plenitude can only therefore be associated with its originator and not to some subsidiary reality. The greater that recognition, the greater is one's spiritual. And the last door in this Manazil is the door of Maqam al-Murad, the desired end. We started, if you remember, with qasid, purposefulness. What end are we seeking? And we end up in this gate through the door of the desired end. Maqam al-Murad. I not expected the book to be delivered to you, were it not from a mercy from your Lord. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما كنت ترجو أن يلقى إليك الكتاب إلا رحمة من ربك. They indicated the desired ones by pointing to the desired end. I tried to translate this the best way I could, but I came up with an unsatisfactory translation. But I'm afraid this is the way it is written. The desired end has 3 degrees. To make the worshipper immune to wrongful acts and dispositions by banishing desires and blocking transgressions. 2, to turn aside the worshipper from seeing deficiencies in his or her actions and absolves him or her from blaming themselves, as was the case with the Prophet Moses when he threw down the tablets and admonished his brother. God did not chastise him. to shield the worshipper by the truth and to pass on more of truth's attributes, as in the case of the Prophet Moses when he carried fire to his people, which he had made for himself but kept its borrowed form for others. I struggled a bit to understand really what Maqam al-Murad is, and I came I've interpolated my own experiences, so it may be or it may not be as close to what Ansari has said. So what I'm reading now is really my take on that. The station of the desired end is when the wayfarer begins to assume more of the attributes of the truth as it befits him or her. The actions of the wayfarer might seem angry or even fierce, but they are protected by the state which they have reached. So there's a state of, you can call it righteous anger. Anger becomes righteous anger, for which there's only recognition. And ferocity becomes passionate single-mindedness in redressing wrongful acts or transgressions. Alternatively, the desired end might lead to utter peacefulness and serenity. Both are conditions that emanate from the same source. The condition of the Prophet Moses is one of ferocity and righteous anger, driven by the name of majesty. The condition of the Prophet Isa is of tranquility and repose, driven by the name of beauty. So the end of this stage is one that I believe Ansari is saying, and I would accept that if that's what he's saying. It is related to your own predilection. The way we started off by saying that the names that are immanent in an individual are expressed in different grades and different quantities. And if you have a mosaic temperament, then the desired end would be one where you are seized by it. You become desirous of righting wrongs. You become desirous of redressing injustices. If your composition is more Isaic, Jesus-like, as it were, it will become more oriented towards service, towards a serene engagement with the station of proximity to the Absolute. Ibrahim, for example, Prophet Abraham in the Quran, he was, well, not in the Quran, but in the stories relating to it, he was in a different kind of state. He was in a state where he could see into people's inner hearts and conditions, and was extremely agitated. You can see in them evil. You can see in them the absence of good. These kinds of insights that come to you, if they come to you, inshallah, you have to weigh them against your own composition and not stray too far from your natural predispositions. All the great beings have a certain flavor to their message, to their prophecy. Sulaiman, for example, Solomon, he was able to manage the powers that exist in different realms, these Solomonic powers. I'm not claiming that there are some individuals who have Solomonic powers, and these Solomonic powers allow you to engage with beings that are of a different composition. So these doors can open, and you have to relate them to your own condition. With that, I think I shall stop. Thank you very much. Can I call for a few minutes break?